Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Frederick Conrod, teach comparative literature at Florida Atlantic University, and in the past few years, I've been working on the application of cultural psychology to cultural products such as novels and films. So today, I'm going to continue with the same discussion I've started last year and the year before in a project regarding narcissism as a cultural pathology affecting Spanish culture. So, once upon a time, there was a culture that badly needed a reshaping of identity. Internal wars, religious tortures, inbreeding in its dynasties, massive colonization and genocide, ethnic and religious cleansings, fascist dictatorships, intellectual persecutions, and diasporas, perverse political strategies between its different regions, and a strong tendency for covering up its deeds with secrets and lies. It all ostracized the culture from developing alongside the rest of their neighbors in Europe. Often ashamed of its cultural gaps in science and philosophy with the rest of the continent, the uniformity of its universities and the impotence of its institutions, the country in the making would continue to exhibit, in parallel, a Baroque taste for continuous festivities, carnivalesque popular confusions, and fireworks of false hopes. It also claims it was different to attract visitors, but never cared to precise from where the difference came from. It constructed an identity that projected joy, diversity, freedom, inviting, open minds, sensuality, and sexual inspirations. It became grandiose, again, through secrets and lies, transfers of responsibility onto its neighbors, and would rather compromise its existence than its reputation. The culture kept on repeating the same pathological cycles of a condition that has been more contagious than any other diseases in the past 50 years, as far as psychology is concerned. And that would be narcissistic personality disorder. The only difference is that it affected the culture at large and not only individuals. Although this fairy tale like opening sounds rather drastic and radical, there is some truth to be extracted from it. Fairy tales have always come very handy to observe cultural psychologies. The question I've been trying to raise in previous talks remains central to this research as well. Can cultures be suffering from the same pathologies than the ones that Western psychology has identified and defined for the individual only? Also, if we do accept to look at cultural pathologies the same way we look at them for individuals, what would be your research methodology around the identification of patterns in a culture? Maybe one strategy I can propose today is to examine the cultural idealization of the mother figure in Spanish culture and its deriving and consequent narcissism found replicated in several of its members. Spaniards have an overall tendency to have lived as if they're living their ancestors' lives and their offspring's lives, which is shown in the same transmission as a narcissistic practice in these two cultures. Sometimes other cultures precisely try to avoid this, but often cannot. Systematic self association with a territory reinforced by linguistic and culinary differences, among others, is also very typical in Spanish culture. The territory as a guarantee of an imagined authenticity, a concept altogether linked to the mentality once attached to the pureza de sangre, right, the purity of blood, is simultaneously what makes the subject envision his or her existence as a link between the previous generation and the following, charged with an inherited essence to pass along to validating children. Spaniards are in majority strong defenders of their traditions, the religion from which most of their culture derived, Catholicism as well. And third, the holy circle of the family, whose core principles are often unquestionable and centered on an infallible mother figure. However, Spaniards are often trapped between the traditional views of their mothers and their desire to be part of a larger, modern, and even postmodern community. Yet they cope with the heavy contradictions between the two poles with narcissistic responses, untruth, and cognitive dissonance. As Giles Trumlett points out in Ghosts of Spain from 2006, tradition and modernity somehow manage to fit snugly together in Spain. It is a wonder to those of us from countries or cultures where the latter has wiped out much of the former. The strange conjunction of old and new produces some of the most endearing pictures, literally so, in the photographic sense, of modern Spain. The conical headed Nazareno astride a motorbike, the turban Moro from a Moors and Christians festival in Alicante, chatting on his mobile phone, or the woman bullfighter from one of Pedro Almodovar's films, dressed in a glittering traje luces, a suit of lights. End quote. Somehow, the rebellion continues to operate within the same system without fully questioning its foundations, to which it still seeks to honor and abide. At first, it can appear as a complex cultural particularity when, in reality, it might be the consequences of a culturally sustained narcissism that strives on maintaining this confusion for the external eye. A culture where cognitive dissonances become the norm and even justify the need for the repetitive cultural practices. The art of confusing with established and prefabricated discourses from both the political and the religious realms is omnipresent in a culture that has often self represented uh, by the stereotypical macho man image of the torero. Yet, I want to take the focus away today from the torero and focus back on the idealization of the mother figure, which could also be perceived as an irrational reverence. The ritualistic nature of most cultural behaviors in Spain can be, in this sense, a challenging pressure on the foreigner who has come to contact with the culture for an extended period of time. For many, it was originally a country of positive energies, enthusiasm, and social connections, initially and from the outside, can quickly turn into a nightmarish situation of total suffocation by an abuse of cognitive dissonances once inside the culture, especially when observing intergenerational communications and exchanges. Yet the cognitive dissonance that can be witnessed in situations where members of a different generation interact within the same family is somewhat troubling as it is very common and present in every realm of Spanish society. Children learn how to navigate between the repressive and the liberating that the culture has to offer, but might end up growing up fragmented and or constantly altering their identity depending on whether or not their mother is in the room. Cognitive capacities are first acquired through the mother, from gestation to birth to upbringing and education, if applicable. Mothers are an image that the individual generally lives with during the entire lifetime, a constant reference, whether it is a positive or a negative one. If clinical narcissism theory applied to the individual can also be applied to a cultural phenomenon, then the figure of the mother in Spain has an important role to play in understanding the overall outreach of the pathology onto the culture. In a 1927 song by Conchita Piquer titled En Tierra Extraña, known of most Spaniards internationally, the Valencian singer cries her nostalgia of Spain from New York City as a daughter to a lost mother. The tone of the song evokes the deprivation of maternal guidance and care in one's adult life. In comparison, one of today's most popular TV shows in Spain, Españoles por el Mundo, Spaniards throughout the world, presents the rest of Spaniards back in Spain with example of countrywomen and countrymen who left the motherland and constantly make clear from their interview from abroad to the remaining non-migrant brethren watching back in Spain that the peninsula, the nation, or the province of origin remains to a great majority of the Spaniards in exile that optimal maternal reference, the Optima Mater. They remind themselves, somewhat systematically, so it seems, in these shows or in the songs, that the only reason that can make them leave, possibly, the Spanish cultural way of life is purely economic. Even when emphasizing a difference, a cultural difference, those who have chosen to live abroad acknowledge the superiority of the culture of origin, as one would never want to dishonor their mother. No other lifestyle in the world, with financial gain included, is to be compared to the one transmitted by the national breast of Spanish culture. And this is where it gets really juicy and interesting. There are many places to be searched to understand the strength of the umbilical cord that unites most Spaniards to the motherland. And one of the first to highlight is the cultural image created over the centuries of their own mothers. Many are the forms of maternalization of the land around the globe. But Spain remains a country where it is the most obvious due to its history as a nation and the unity often enforced around a potentially explosive cohabitation of cultures. Literature and the arts, from the medieval Cantigas de Santa Maria to the realist depictions of castrating mothers in Benito Pérez Galdós uh, or Garcia Lorca, to the many mothers we see collected in Pedro Almodovar's films, are all an everlasting proof that the foundations to this cultural devotion are proven their strength throughout the centuries. The mother has unified and she has also purified. España, a country that uses the feminine form, is more of a mother than a wife or a sister to its citizens. Centuries of patriotic motifs have merged the devotion to the Holy Virgin Mary with the adoration of the nation and the land, the motherland, in the collective unconscious. It is not uncommon to see a flag next to a statue of the Mother of Christ in all the places where she has appeared around the Holy Land of Spain. From Montserrat to Lourdes, is close to Spain, from Fatima in Portugal to El Rosillo in Andalusia, Mother Mary has shown her preference and protection for the nation who has guarded Catholicism safe from Judaism, Islam, and Protestantism. Those many apparitions circling the peninsula, and particularly Spain as its major territory, seem to point to a preference for Spanish Catholicism, or rather, this expression of the Roman religion as a particular need for the omnipresence of the Virgin Mary in its public and private spheres. According to Linda B. Hall, and I quote, "It is essential to understand the way in which her cult and image fit into the sacred landscape of Spain, metaphorically and literally." End of quote. Not only was this maternal image brought forward during times of Muslim invasion, it also became the cultural symbol of that unity and brotherhood in the Reconquest, the Reconquista. It formed fraternities, las hermandades. They were established around the worship of a particular apparition of Mary in a certain town or village, and it proves the need to gather as many siblings as possible under the same celestial mother. Once anchored in the cultural mind of a country, these images continue to impact each generation with a repeated assimilation of La Virgen Maria with each individual's mothers, metaphorically and literally. The vision of the Optima Mater, a mother figure, somewhat merging the universal divine motherhood with the temporal biological one, unites in the collective unconsciousness the feelings of territory with that of motherhood and childhood. For most Spaniards, nowhere else can the origin of old culture be found, as they often perceive their land as that very origin, or in other words, a spring for other cultural modes, elevated enough to be protected from confluences from a background where the concept of pureza, purity, remains attached to most cultural practices. In turn, the products of culture and cultures in plural in Spain maintain a motherly familiarity in their senses. Maybe it is even more obvious in the migrants, as we pointed out before, because they have the capacity to express the nostalgia and the separation anxieties from the motherland at a higher pitch of pain. Mother is never wrong. You will often hear Spaniards chant the natural superiority of territorial products, the one who were usually cooked and served by their mother or another mother figure in the house where they grew up. Mother generally knows best in many areas of life, ranging from the recetas de la cocina, the recipes, to the recetas de medicina, the prescriptions, and has opinions about their offspring's private life well beyond their marriage. She has mastered both nature and culture in the vision of her children. Her assimilation to the Virgin Mary, often characterized by a name composed with Maria or another apparition of the Mother of God, Asunción, Visitación, Rosillo, Montserrat, Lourdes, Fatima, etc., etc., um, make her somewhat omniscient and revered in their eyes. Her methods are not to be questioned, and she grows older in full respect and sometimes submission to the solutions she has enforced for every problem. Even alternative mothers who desire to appear more liberal and escape the rules can find themselves trapped in these dynamics where their own mothers or reproduce them against their own conscious will. Culture, when adopted as a whole and assimilated with an omnipotent motherhood, can be stronger in determining an individual's social behavior than an entire education in critical thinking and the liberal arts. We owe a lot to the Manchego film director Pedro Almodovar for breaking the taboos around the Optima Mater throughout its cinematography, as it is now well known and has been commented in cultural studies in the past 3 decades. In his works, we often meet mothers who present similar yet evolving psychological patterns and struggles. His choices of actress to embody these mothers is in itself an overarching narrative for the irrational reverence to the motherland and the figure of the mother. There must be a reason why he's chosen to couple, for example, Julieta Serrano and Antonio Banderas 3 times during his career as mother and son in one of his films. First time in 1986 with Matador, second time in 1988 with Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, and back in 2019 with the movie Pain and Glory. Perhaps the most obvious narcissist mother of all three is the one we observe in Matador. A caricature of a whole generation of mothers, Serrano offers in this film partially about narcissistic pathologies an incomparable representation of the repressive mother who feeds her son with guilt, invalidation, and reproaches. More than a castrating mother, she stereotypes in a critical mode the temperament of the Optima Mater. In her, as in many other mothers, the maternal has absorbed the paternal, and she has assumed both responsibilities as a symbolically widowed mother. In this current research, I look at the multiple representation from the paintings we can find in Francisco Goya to the contemporary films and novel that we just discussed. And I welcome anyone's input, comments, and suggestions or questions to continue writing this chapter. Cultural psychologists such as Dr. Ramani Durvasula, which I respect very much, have started working on the impact of such caricatures of narcissistic mothers that are to be encountered as such sometimes in real life. Narcissism in an individual is very linked to the relationship between the child and the mother when invalidation happens on a daily basis during the child's upbringing. In Almodovar's films, the instances of such moments of invalidation by the mother are countless. The conservative figure of the mother constantly finds grounds to refrain her son from developing, therefore causing him and him narcissistic behaviors to cope with the recurring downgrading. Whether Almodovar suggests that this is a cultural phenomenon beyond the caricature is up to the public to accept or not. I personally think it is. In a later film, 3 years after Matador in 1989, Atame, translated as Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, the reflection on Spanish narcissism will continue in his films through the submissive relationship that the two sisters, Lola and Marina, have with their mother, interpreted by Almodovar's own mother, Paquita, a non professional actress who did not even like to watch her son's films. And to conclude, in all instances of dominating mothers, those mothers that are a factory for narcissistic children, we find several of them in the cinematography. It is shocking to see how the depicted narcissistic adults expose childish attitudes and uses lies when they're confronted to their mothers. Um, Almodovar's comedies and tragedies also emphasize immediate changes of behavior in many of the characters when the mother enters the scene. And in my opinion, that's all due to this idea, this concept of the Optima Mater, right? This is the irrational reverence to a mother associated with the land that imposes herself by imposing behaviors around her. I thank you very much for watching. Obviously, this is just a work in progress, and I'll be very happy to answer any emails or any questions you have for me. I want to thank the New Direction in the Humanities for letting me present this beginning of work today at the conference. I wish everybody a great summer. Thank you.